The Axeloroth Dominion had conquered countless worlds, crushing civilizations that dared to resist. Their fleets stretched across the galaxy, their armies stood undefeated for centuries, and their leaders believed in their absolute superiority. To them, war was routine, a simple process of domination. They would arrive, demand surrender, and if the enemy refused, they would burn their worlds to ash. No species had ever withstood their might. When their scouts discovered Earth, they expected another effortless victory. The reports were clear. Humanity had no planetary shields, no war fleets capable of interstellar battle, and no known superweapons. Their ships were primitive, their technology outdated, and their military laughably small. The Dominion's warlords saw this as nothing more than another conquest, a minor campaign that would be over in days. Their emperor, Exalvorn the Eternal, declared war without hesitation. The great fleets of the Dominion gathered, their war banners stretching across the void, ready to bring ruin to yet another insignificant species. The first wave of the invasion was massive. Thousands of warships darkened the skies as they entered Earth's atmosphere, their weapons charged, their commanders confident. They had done this 100 times before. This would be no different. But something strange happened. Instead of immediate surrender, they received silence. No desperate pleas for mercy, no terrified leaders begging to negotiate. The humans simply watched. Then, in an instant, Earth's defenses activated. Satellites that appeared harmless suddenly turned into weapons, unleashing devastating energy blasts. Ground-based missile silos fired in unison, striking the invading ships with deadly precision. The Dominion's fleet, expecting no resistance, was caught off guard. Dozens of their ships exploded before they could react. For the first time in centuries, the great war machine of the Dominion faced an enemy that refused to be crushed without a fight. The Dominion quickly recovered from the initial shock and deployed their ground forces. Massive troop carriers descended onto Earth, releasing waves of soldiers onto human soil. They expected chaos, panic, and surrender. Instead, they were met with organized, relentless resistance. Human soldiers, outnumbered and outgunned, fought with a ferocity the invaders had never seen before. They did not fight like the weak creatures the Dominion had imagined. They fought with precision, using guerrilla tactics, ambushes, and strategies that confused and frustrated the invaders. Every city became a battlefield, every street a death trap. Dominion soldiers, trained for quick and decisive victories, found themselves in prolonged battles they were unprepared for. Their energy weapons were powerful, but they could not break the human spirit. Every time they thought they had crushed the resistance in one area, it would rise again somewhere else. The humans did not surrender. They adapted. They learned. They retaliated. As the days turned into weeks, the Dominion began to realize something was terribly wrong. Their forces were supposed to have secured the planet within days, yet they were struggling to hold their positions. Supply lines were being attacked, communication networks were being disrupted, and their own soldiers were beginning to fear the humans. The reports from the front lines were filled with confusion. "They are not like the others," one commander reported. "They do not break. They do not surrender. They fight as if death means nothing to them." The war, which was meant to be a swift and glorious victory, was turning into a nightmare. The Dominion's arrogance had blinded them. They had assumed humanity would be weak, that their lack of advanced technology meant they would be easy to conquer. But they had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated not just humanity's weapons, but their will to fight. Back on the Dominion's homeworld, the Emperor was growing impatient. He could not understand why the war had not yet ended. His generals assured him that victory was inevitable, that it was only a matter of time before humanity fell. But deep down, some of them were beginning to doubt. No species had ever fought them like this. No species had ever resisted for so long. And for the first time in the history of the Dominion, there was a whisper of something they had never known before. Fear. The Axeloroth Dominion had always fought wars on their own terms. They had crushed countless species. their fleets sweeping through the stars like an unstoppable tide. Their war doctrine was simple: overwhelm the enemy, destroy their defenses, and demand surrender. And if surrender did not come, they would burn entire planets to make an example. It had always worked. It was a system perfected over centuries. But this time, against humanity, nothing was going as planned. Their invasion fleet, one of the largest ever assembled, had expected an easy campaign. Earth had no grand space fleets, no planetary shields, and no weapons that could threaten them beyond their own atmosphere. And yet, the moment the war began, everything started to fall apart. Their first wave had suffered unexpected losses. Their ground forces had landed, but instead of a quick victory, they found themselves trapped in an endless struggle. The humans fought with a brutality and resilience that defied all logic. The Dominion had seen resistance before, but nothing like this. Human soldiers did not run when outnumbered, did not break when cornered. They fought with an almost terrifying determination, using tactics that the Dominion had never encountered. Cities turned into death traps, forests became hunting grounds, and even the most open battlefields turned into nightmares for the invaders. The Dominion's commanders underestimated human adaptability. At first, they believed that superior numbers and firepower would guarantee victory. But humans did not fight the way the Dominion expected. They did not stand in formation and die like the lesser species the Dominion had conquered before. Instead, they hid in the ruins of their own cities, ambushed patrols, and used their own environment as a weapon. The Dominion's war machines, designed for large-scale planetary assaults, struggled in this kind of warfare. Tanks meant for crushing opposition found themselves unable to maneuver in the narrow, debris-filled streets. Air support, which had been effective in past wars, was rendered useless by human anti-air weapons that seemed to appear from nowhere. Even the Dominion soldiers, trained to be ruthless and efficient, found themselves rattled. The humans did not fight like prey. They fought like hunters. Reports from the battlefield were filled with confusion and frustration. Dominion soldiers spoke of enemies that attacked in the night, struck without warning, and disappeared before they could retaliate. Every time they thought they had gained the upper hand, humanity adapted. Every time they adjusted their tactics, humanity countered. The Dominion's greatest mistake was assuming that humans feared death. In past wars, species had surrendered the moment their casualties became too high, unwilling to risk total extinction. But humans were different. The more the Dominion killed, the harder they fought. The more destruction they unleashed, the more determined humanity became. The concept of total war was something the Dominion had never truly faced before. They were used to breaking an enemy's spirit, forcing them into submission through sheer force. But with humanity, their brutality had the opposite effect. Instead of surrender, they were met with rage. Instead of fear, they were met with defiance. The Dominion's war machine, so used to easy victories, was now being forced into a battle it had never prepared for. Supplies ran low as human resistance cut off supply lines. Dominion soldiers, once confident and disciplined, began to grow paranoid. Every shadow could be an enemy, every ruined building a possible ambush. Even their superior technology was failing them. Humanity had learned to steal and use captured Dominion weapons, turning their own firepower against them. The war, meant to be a swift conquest, was dragging on with no end in sight. Panic spread through the Dominion's leadership. The Emperor, furious at the lack of progress, demanded immediate results. More reinforcements were sent, more ships deployed. But nothing changed. Humanity refused to break. The Dominion had always believed that strength was measured in firepower, in numbers, in superior weapons. But they had failed to see the true strength of humanity. Their mind, their will, their refusal to accept defeat. They had entered this war believing they would crush Earth in days. Now months had passed, and the Dominion was bleeding. For the first time in history, they were losing. And for the first time, the unshakable empire began to feel something it had never felt before: doubt. The Axeloroth Dominion had fought many wars, but none like this. Their invasion of Earth, once expected to be an effortless conquest, had turned into a disaster. Their fleets had burned the skies, their soldiers had landed in overwhelming numbers, yet they had not broken humanity. No matter how much destruction they unleashed, no matter how many lives they took, the humans refused to surrender. It was unnatural. Every other species they had encountered had eventually submitted, crushed beneath the might of the Dominion. But humanity did not submit. They fought with an unrelenting fury, with a will so strong that even death did not seem to deter them. The Dominion had underestimated them, believing that their primitive technology and lack of interstellar experience made them weak. But now, the great empire was learning a painful truth. Humanity was stronger than they had ever imagined. The war had dragged on far longer than expected. The Dominion's commanders, once confident of victory, now found themselves trapped in a conflict that refused to end. Their war machines, designed for swift planetary conquest, were struggling. Human soldiers had adapted to their tactics, turning cities into fortresses and the wilderness into hunting grounds. The Dominion's forces, despite their superior weapons, were constantly being ambushed, harassed, and picked apart. Every battle they fought was met with fierce resistance, every attack countered with terrifying precision. It was as if the humans were learning with every engagement, growing stronger, smarter, deadlier. They fought in ways that defied logic. Even when outnumbered, they refused to retreat. Even when surrounded, they found a way to strike back. Their resilience was beyond anything the Dominion had ever encountered. As the weeks turned into months, the Dominion began to suffer losses they could not afford. Entire battalions vanish overnight, cut down by human resistance forces. Supply lines were constantly under attack, forcing the Dominion to divert troops just to protect their own resources. Morale among their soldiers was crumbling. They had come expecting victory, yet they had found themselves trapped in a nightmare. The humans did not fight for territory, nor for resources. They fought for survival, and that made them more dangerous than any enemy the Dominion had ever faced. The Empire had thought it could break them, but it was the Dominion that was breaking. Reports from the front lines spoke of soldiers refusing to leave their bases, terrified of human ambushes. Others whispered about how the humans did not fear death, how they fought even when wounded, how they refused to surrender even when all hope seemed lost. Some began to believe that humanity was not just another species. They were something more, something unstoppable. The Emperor himself grew desperate. He ordered more forces to be sent, more ships to be deployed. He demanded that Earth be crushed at all costs. But it was too late. The war had reached a turning point, and for the first time in Dominion history, they were losing. The humans had survived the worst the Empire could throw at them, and now they were fighting back harder than ever. The resistance was no longer just defending, it was pushing the invaders back. Dominion outposts were being destroyed one by one. Their mighty warships, once unchallenged in space, were now being shot down by weapons the humans had learned to build from captured technology. The Empire, once so certain of its dominance, now faced a terrifying reality. It was no longer the hunter, it was the hunted. Then the unthinkable happened. A message, broadcasted across the Dominion's networks, sent a chilling wave of realization through their leadership. It was a simple transmission, spoken in a human voice, calm yet filled with an undeniable sense of power. You thought we would break. You thought we would surrender. But you have made a mistake. We are humanity, and we do not bow to tyrants. It was a declaration, not of defiance, but of certainty. The war was no longer just a struggle for survival. It was a reckoning. The Dominion had sought to conquer humanity, but now they faced something they had never expected. A species that would not stop until it had destroyed its enemy completely. The Emperor, once so proud, now sat in silence, realizing the full extent of his mistake. He had not just started a war. He had awakened a force that could not be broken. And as the last of his fleets burned in the skies above Earth, he understood the terrible truth. The Dominion had thought they could defeat humanity, but they had never stood a chance. The Axelroth Dominion had never known defeat. For centuries, their empire had expanded without resistance, crushing civilizations and claiming their worlds. They had expected humanity to be no different, a primitive species standing no chance against their superior technology. But now, the war had dragged on far longer than the Dominion had anticipated, and something was changing. The unshakable empire, once confident in its conquest, was now beginning to crack. The war had not gone as planned. Earth was still standing. The humans, despite suffering heavy losses, had not surrendered. Their forces had not weakened. Instead, they had grown stronger, more ruthless, more determined. The Dominion had thrown everything at them: bombardments, biological attacks, terror campaigns, yet humanity refused to break. And now, for the first time in the Dominion's long history, their forces were in retreat. The first real signs of trouble had begun when human resistance forces stopped fighting just to survive. Before, they had been on the defensive, fighting to hold on to whatever ground they could. But something had changed. They had begun to strike back with calculated precision, targeting key Dominion supply lines, sabotaging their most advanced weapons, and crippling entire battalions in ways that defied logic. The Dominion's commanders, once so sure of victory, now found themselves struggling to understand how their mighty war machine was falling apart. Reports from the front lines spoke of human forces operating in a way the Dominion had never encountered. They no longer fought like desperate survivors. They fought like predators. Every battle the Dominion engaged in ended worse than the last. Their soldiers were not just being killed. They were being outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and most terrifying of all, outlasted. The war had reached its turning point when a major Dominion fleet, sent to reinforce their ground forces, was ambushed and completely destroyed. It should have been impossible. The Dominion's fleet was equipped with some of the most advanced technology in the galaxy. Their ships were built for large-scale planetary assaults, capable of bombarding entire continents into submission. But the humans had learned their weaknesses. Using tactics no Dominion commander had ever considered, they had lured the fleet into a trap, using debris fields and gravitational distortions to force them into a bottleneck. Before the Dominion ships could adjust, human strike teams launched an overwhelming assault, utilizing stolen Dominion technology against them. The once invincible fleet, the pride of the Empire, was reduced to burning wreckage in less than an hour. The impact of the fleet's destruction was immediate and devastating. Dominion forces, already struggling against human resistance, suddenly found themselves without reinforcements. Panic spread among their ranks. Commanders, once confident in their superiority, now doubted every decision. Their supply lines, already weakened, collapsed entirely, leaving entire divisions stranded with no food, no weapons, and no hope of extraction. The humans wasted no time in exploiting this weakness. What had once been scattered pockets of resistance now turned into an organized, relentless offensive. One by one, Dominion-controlled territories on Earth began to fall. Bases that had been considered unbreakable were wiped out in coordinated attacks. Dominion soldiers, who had once believed they were the conquerors, now found themselves hunted. The psychological toll on the Dominion forces was just as severe as the physical damage. Their soldiers had been trained to see themselves as invincible, as superior beings above the lesser races of the galaxy. But now, they faced an enemy that did not fear them, an enemy that was faster, smarter, and more ruthless than anything they had ever encountered. Human forces did not fight for power or glory. They fought for something far greater: survival, vengeance, and the unshakable belief that they would not be defeated. Dominion troops, once disciplined and unwavering, began to break. Deserters fled into the shadows, abandoning their posts in fear. Commanders who had once boasted of crushing Earth now pleaded for reinforcements that would never come. Then came the final blow, the fall of the Dominion's largest command center on Earth. Situated deep within a captured human city, the base had been thought to be impenetrable. guarded by elite forces and surrounded by defensive barriers. But the humans had learned every weakness, exploited every vulnerability. The attack came swiftly and without mercy. Explosions rocked the base from within as human infiltrators disabled critical systems. Before the Dominion forces could respond, waves of human soldiers stormed the facility, moving through the corridors like ghosts of vengeance. By the time the sun rose over the ruins, the command center had been annihilated, and every surviving Dominion officer had been captured or executed. It was the first time in Dominion history that an enemy had taken one of their primary command centers. It would not be the last. Across the Empire, the news spread like wildfire. The unthinkable had happened. The Dominion, the great and unstoppable force of the galaxy, had suffered a defeat so devastating that even the Emperor himself was shaken. He had believed, as had all of his commanders, that humanity would be just another footnote in the history of their conquests. Now, he saw the truth. Humanity was not just another species to be conquered. They were something else entirely. Something that could not be broken, no matter how much firepower was thrown at them. The war was no longer just a battle for control. It was now a war for survival. Only this time, it was the Dominion that was fighting to survive. The turning point had arrived. Humanity had not only resisted the Dominion's invasion, they had turned the tide of the war. The invaders who had once seen themselves as gods now knew fear. The battle for Earth was far from over, but one thing was clear. Humanity was no longer fighting just to survive. They were fighting to win. The skies above Earth burned with the wreckage of Dominion warships, their massive hulks tumbling from orbit like dying beasts. Fires raged across the battlefields where the once mighty invaders had stood, their towering machines of war now little more than twisted metal and shattered remains. The Dominion had believed itself to be an unstoppable force, a conqueror of worlds that would crush humanity beneath its heel. But now, their forces were in complete disarray, their empire unraveling before their eyes. The humans, whom they had once considered weak and insignificant, had become the nightmare that haunted their every step. And now, after years of brutal war, the final battle had begun, the battle that would decide the fate of the Dominion itself. For too long, Earth had suffered under the Dominion's rule. Cities had been turned to rubble, families torn apart, and entire nations left in ruins. The invaders had believed that fear and destruction would break humanity's spirit, that their advanced technology would make resistance impossible. But instead of surrendering, the humans had grown stronger. Every battle, every loss, had only hardened them, forging them into warriors unlike anything the Dominion had ever faced. Now, as the last remnants of the enemy's forces clung desperately to their strongholds, humanity launched its final offensive, determined to end the war once and for all. The attack began at dawn. Across the planet, human forces moved with precise coordination, their strikes aimed at the heart of the remaining Dominion strongholds. They no longer fought from the shadows, no longer relied solely on guerrilla tactics. This was an all-out war, a full-scale retaliation against an enemy that had once believed itself invincible. The Dominion's planetary headquarters, a sprawling fortress that had once served as the center of their operations on Earth, was now under siege. Artillery rained down upon its defenses, while human soldiers stormed the outer walls with an unstoppable fury. Every corridor, every bunker, became a battleground as the invaders fought desperately to hold their ground. But they were no longer fighting against a scattered resistance. They were fighting against the full force of humanity's wrath. Inside the fortress, Dominion commanders struggled to maintain order. Communications were breaking down, supply lines had been cut, and their soldiers, once so disciplined, were beginning to panic. Reports flooded in from across the battlefield. Entire battalions wiped out, key defensive positions overrun, and human forces advancing faster than anyone had thought possible. The Dominion had never faced an enemy like this before. Their previous conquests had always ended the same way, with the opposing forces broken, surrendering before their superior firepower. But the humans did not surrender. They adapted, they endured, and they struck back harder than any enemy before them. As the hours passed, the fortress's defenses collapsed one by one. The once imposing walls, reinforced with alien metals and energy shields, crumbled under the relentless assault. Human soldiers breached the main gates, pushing forward with a determination that seemed almost inhuman. Dominion warriors, once feared across the galaxy, fell by the hundreds, their weapons useless against an enemy that refused to be stopped. Desperation set in among the remaining commanders. They knew they had lost. There was no escape, no reinforcements coming to save them. The great Dominion fleet, which had once dominated the skies above Earth, had been shattered. Their last warships had either fled or been destroyed, leaving them stranded, cut off from their empire. Then, the final moment arrived. The command center, the heart of the Dominion's operations, was breached. Human forces surged inside, their weapons cutting down the last defenders with ruthless efficiency. At the center of it all stood High Commander Xaltar, the leader of the invasion force, the one who had once stood before his people and promised them victory. Now, he watched in horror as his empire's dreams of conquest crumbled before his eyes. He had underestimated these humans. He had believed, like all of his kind, that they were weak, fragile creatures. But now, as he stood in the ruins of his once great fortress, surrounded by human soldiers who had fought through hell to get here, he understood the truth. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was not fragile. They were relentless, and they had won. With the fall of the command center, the last remnants of the Dominion's forces surrendered. There was nowhere left to run, no more battles to fight. Across the planet, the remaining Dominion troops laid down their weapons, knowing that the war was over. The once mighty invaders, who had come to Earth believing they would claim it as their own, had been utterly defeated. The great Dominion, the terror of the galaxy, had met its match. And in the end, it was not superior technology or overwhelming firepower that had won the war. It was the unbreakable spirit of humanity. As the sun set over the battlefield, a new era began. The war was over, but humanity's fight was not. They had driven the invaders from their home, but the galaxy was still vast, and the Dominion still existed beyond the stars. But now, the roles had changed. No longer were humans the ones being conquered. Now, they were the ones who would decide what came next. And the Dominion, once so sure of its superiority, now knew the truth. Humanity was a force that could never be broken, and they would never forget the day they fell.